The kill squad touched down at dawn, boots slamming into the muddy earth as they fanned out across the swamp. Their mission was clear: eliminate 2 rogue human operatives named Ghost and Soap. Every alien soldier in the squad was armed with next-generation plasma rifles, thermal sensors, and body armor that could withstand a direct missile strike. They had killed insurgents on a dozen worlds, burned cities to ash, and toppled governments in a single day. Earth, to them, was just another primitive backwater. They didn't even bother reviewing the terrain reports. How hard could it be? 2 humans, some dirt, some trees. But they didn't see the muddy footprints already circling their camp, or the half-buried traps hidden in the muck, or the 2 figures watching from the treeline with faces painted in swamp mud and eyes like wolves stalking their prey. Ghost nudged Soap with his elbow, whispering with a smirk, "Bet they don't last till sundown." Soap just chuckled low, adjusting the vine-wrapped stock of his old rifle. The game had already begun. The kill squad's commander, a burly alien named Captain Zarvek, barked orders through his translator. Their formation tightened. Drones zipped into the sky, scanning with thermal optics. A series of high-pitched beeps confirmed they had locked onto 2 human-sized targets ahead. With arrogant efficiency, Zarvek ordered a full assault. Plasma bolts lit up the swamp. Trees splintered. Mud boiled where blasts struck the ground. The aliens advanced with mechanical precision, confident they had already cornered their prey. But when they reached the target zone, they found only 2 bundles of swamp reeds, wrapped and warmed to mimic human body heat. Taped to one was a crudely scratched note. "Try harder." The first snare sprang a heartbeat later. One alien trooper, moving too fast, stepped into a camouflaged mud sink. With a wet sucking sound, he sank up to his chest. Panicking, he struggled, but the more he fought, the deeper he slid. His comrades rushed to help, but another snapped a tripwire, sending a net of thorn vines crashing down. Chaos erupted. Shouts, curses, frantic flailing. From the shadows, Ghost and Soap watched it unfold like an opening act. Soap muttered, "Not exactly elite, eh?" Ghost simply shook his head, wiping a streak of mud across his cheek to blend deeper into the murk. By midday, the swamp had claimed more of the kill squad's pride than Ghost and Soap ever could have hoped for. Their gleaming armor was caked in filth, their weapons sputtered with mud-choked barrels, and their polished boots had been abandoned for bare, slime-coated feet. Bugs the size of a man's thumb feasted on any exposed skin. Worse, their high-end tech, so vital to their tactics, had begun to fail. The humidity fried delicate circuitry. Waterlogged batteries shorted out. Their drones spun uselessly overhead, glitching and crashing into the trees. Ghost and Soap hadn't fired a single shot yet, but the swamp had already turned the odds. As afternoon slipped toward evening, Ghost decided it was time to turn up the pressure. They crept in close, mud-caked bodies blending so seamlessly into the terrain they might as well have been part of it. With careful hands, Ghost set up false tracks leading deeper into the swamp's deadliest section. Soap, meanwhile, rigged noise traps, simple things, just sticks and leaves designed to crunch at the slightest touch. The traps were so subtle, so natural, that when one snapped, it sent a jolt of fear through the nearest alien's spine. Plasma rifles swung wildly in every direction. Branches exploded under friendly fire. Captain Zarvek tried to rally his squad with snarling orders, but the damage was done. Fear had seeped into their bones. They whispered among themselves about the ghosts of Earth, about how no army had ever truly conquered this mudball planet. Ghost and Soap were just 2 men, but in the minds of the aliens, they had become something more: legends, monsters, spirits of vengeance risen from the muck. At sunset, Ghost and Soap staged their first direct strike. As the kill squad huddled around a struggling campfire, desperate to dry their soaked weapons, a series of shrill whistles echoed through the trees. The aliens snapped to alert, forming a defensive ring. Then came a low growl, guttural and deep, rolling through the mist. Shadows darted between trees. Something big was out there, but what? In truth, it was just a recording, carefully positioned on a cracked drone speaker. But the effect was devastating. One trooper panicked and bolted into the trees. The squad's perimeter broke. That's when Soap struck. Emerging silently from a curtain of hanging moss, Soap grabbed the panicked trooper from behind, dragging him into the swamp like a crocodile pulling prey into the depths. The trooper's muffled screams were cut short. When the others found him minutes later, all they found was his plasma rifle, jammed into the mud and still smoldering. Ghost left a message burned into the mud beside it with the trooper's own plasma cutter. "You are prey." The remaining squad members retreated, shaken and spooked, deeper into unfamiliar terrain. They didn't know that Ghost and Soap had mapped every inch of this swamp over the past month, setting deadfalls, pit traps, and natural choke points. Every turn was a choice between slow death and sudden ambush. Their fancy armor didn't stop leeches from sliding under their collars or biting flies from drilling into their skin. Their night vision, useless in the heavy fog, only amplified their own fears, seeing shapes and phantoms where there were none. By nightfall, the kill squad's numbers had dwindled. Not from direct combat, but from terror, confusion, and the swamp itself. One alien staggered into a hollow log and set off a black powder charge hidden inside, Ghost's homemade bomb, barely powerful enough to kill but loud enough to make survivors deaf and blind for crucial moments. Another slipped into a bog hole disguised under a mat of floating weeds, never to surface again. Ghost and Soap moved like spirits through it all, never revealing themselves, always one step ahead, letting the swamp finish what they had started. At midnight, Ghost and Soap reconvened atop a ridge overlooking the kill squad's dwindling campfires. Ghost wiped a smear of mud from his nose, his voice low and almost amused. "Think they missed their mothership yet?" Soap huffed a laugh, slapping at a mosquito. "If they're smart, they'll call for evac." Ghost just stared down at the broken remnants of the once proud kill squad and said, "It won't get the chance." In the cold, wet silence, the final phase of the hunt began. And for the first time since their arrival, the kill squad realized they weren't hunting anything at all. They were already being buried by it. The first crack of dawn did little to lift the suffocating fog that clung to the swamp, turning every tree into a looming shadow and every shallow puddle into a possible grave. The kill squad, battered and humiliated, stumbled through the muck with a growing sense of dread that gnawed at their discipline. Captain Zarvek snarled into his comms, ordering a regroup and formation spread, but the squad was already unraveling at the seams. Half their weapons were jammed with mud, their boots had been sucked off by the bogs, and their senses, so reliant on technology, were useless against the primal chaos surrounding them. Ghost and Soap moved invisibly through it all, watching the division like wolves circling a wounded herd. Ghost tapped Soap's shoulder, motioning toward two soldiers who had strayed too far from the group. Soap just nodded, his eyes gleaming with mischief under the layers of wet mud coating his face. The trap was simple but brutal. Ghost had set a crude noise trap along the high ridgeline, nothing more than a cluster of dry reeds tied with old fishing line, stretched tight across a narrow gap. The first alien snapped it without noticing, triggering a sharp, unmistakable crack that echoed through the trees. In their panic, the two soldiers turned their backs to each other, scanning the trees and shouting in their strange, clicking language. That was all the invitation Soap needed. He emerged like a nightmare, covered in grime, with nothing but a battered old combat knife glinting in his hand. One swift strike took down the first soldier, a hard crack to the side of the helmet that knocked him sprawling into the mud. The second tried to bring his plasma rifle up, but Ghost's boot connected with his wrist from the shadows, sending the weapon spiraling into the bog. The two men disappeared into the mist as fast as they had appeared, leaving behind only footprints and terrified screams. Zarvek rallied what was left of his squad, barking at them to fall back toward their landing zone, but every path was a nightmare maze. Ghost and Soap had memorized the swamp's treacherous terrain. Paths that looked clear led straight into sinkholes hidden under mats of moss. Small hills turned into collapsing mudslides under careless boots. Thorny vines shredded armor and equipment. The kill squad was no longer fighting Ghost and Soap. They were fighting Earth itself. At one point, an alien scout tried using his thermal vision to spot their attackers. He locked onto a heat signature moving fast through the brush. With a triumphant snarl, He took aim and fired a barrage of plasma bolts. The air filled with the sizzle of superheated energy. But when he and the others closed in, they found nothing but a large wild boar, its flanks scorched but very much alive and very much angry. The boar charged, goring one alien through the thigh before vanishing into the swamp. In the distance, Ghost and Soap's laughter carried like ghosts on the wind. Desperation bled into paranoia. The aliens began turning their weapons on every shadow, every twitch of leaves, every splash in the distant waters. Their leader tried to maintain control, shouting orders and threatening punishment, but it was no use. Fear had seeped deep into their bones. Ghost and Soap didn't even have to engage directly anymore. They just set traps that made the kill squad fight themselves. False trails lined with crushed grass and boot prints led soldiers into bogs where they sank knee-deep before realizing they were trapped. Distorted recordings of human voices played through hacked alien comms, whispering from every direction. At one point, an alien fired wildly into the mist, convinced he saw a human charging him, only to accidentally shoot one of his own in the confusion. Zarvek's anger turned to panic. His squad was bleeding itself dry without Ghost and Soap lifting a finger. As the sun climbed higher, the swamp's heat turned oppressive. Armor that had once been their greatest advantage now cooked the aliens inside like sealed ovens. Sweat poured into their eyes, short-circuiting visor feeds and frying sensitive targeting systems. They stripped off pieces of their armor to survive, but that only made them more vulnerable. Biting insects, thorn plants, and razor-sharp reeds carved into exposed skin. Infection set in quickly, worsening the disorientation. Ghost and Soap wove through this mess like phantoms, laying fresh traps behind every fallen trooper, stealing weapons, sabotaging surviving drones. They never struck the same way twice. One ambush involved a simple tripwire and a hidden pit. Another involved baiting two aliens into firing on each other. Sometimes, it was nothing more than a whisper in the reeds that sent them scattering. Zarvek finally made the call to set up a defensive perimeter near the remnants of their crash-drop ship. He ordered motion sensors and automated turrets set around the area, determined to hold out until reinforcements arrived. It was a logical decision. It was also exactly what Ghost and Soap had been counting on. The two humans knew the swamp's rules better than anyone. Static targets died first. As the kill squad dug in, Ghost and Soap prepared their final phase. They slipped into the perimeter unseen, taking advantage of the aliens' fear and exhaustion. Ghost moved low, slicing the power cables to half the motion sensors. Soap climbed a twisted cypress tree, setting up an old-world claymore mine salvaged from an ancient bunker deep in the woods. Neither made a sound louder than a heartbeat. The first turret to fall triggered a panic. Plasma bolts arced into the trees, lighting the mist in a brilliant, deadly show of light. But there was no target. Only the dripping wet trees and endless walls of fog. When the second turret died, the aliens huddled closer, abandoning their perimeter in favor of a tight, clustered defense. That was their biggest mistake. Ghost and Soap sprang the trap. From opposite sides, they unleashed chaos. Homemade Molotovs crafted from swamp oil and broken ship fuel tanks ignited the ground in a wall of fire. Smoke choked the air, blinding the already half-blind squad. The swamp itself seemed to come alive, the fire reflecting in pools of water and making the trees dance like demonic silhouettes. In the confusion, Ghost and Soap moved through the enemy like reapers. Silent. Deadly. Inevitable. The aliens fought back desperately, but their shots were wild, wasted on shadows. The two humans didn't need fancy plasma rifles or high-tech armor. They needed only patience, ruthlessness, and the terrain they had turned into a weapon. By the time the fires died down and the smoke cleared, the kill squad had been reduced to scattered survivors, broken in body and spirit, their once pristine armor now charred and caked in the swamp's filth. As the final screams faded into the wet silence, Ghost and Soap knelt in the mud, breathing hard but grinning. Ghost wiped a streak of grime from his brow and glanced at the horizon where more storm clouds were gathering. Soap tilted his head toward the crippled drop ship, where the last few survivors huddled in fear. "Think we should tell him this was the easy part," he muttered. Ghost chuckled darkly, loading a fresh clip into his mud-spattered rifle. "Now, let's show 'em." The swamp closed in around them once more, and the hunt pressed deeper into madness. Mud oozed between Ghost's fingers as he crouched near the wreckage of the drop ship, studying the desperate movements of the last few surviving aliens. Their camp was a mess of broken gear, burned tents, and half-buried bodies. The few who remained were reduced to wild-eyed, twitching wrecks, clutching their weapons as if they might ward off the darkness gathering around them. Soap lay flat on his stomach a few yards away, his face nearly submerged in a pool of stagnant water, watching through a curtain of hanging moss. Ghost flicked a small pebble toward him, and Soap responded with the barest tilt of his head. No words were needed. They knew what came next. The plan was not about overwhelming force. That had never been the game. It was about pressure, about driving the enemy to the brink and then stepping lightly across it. Ghost moved first, sliding through the mud like a shadow, creeping past the twisted remains of an alien turret. He placed a crude decoy, little more than a helmet stuffed with swamp moss, onto a half-collapsed crate and slipped back into the darkness. Moments later, Soap triggered a noise trap behind the drop ship, a hollow clatter that echoed like footsteps through the fog. Predictably, two of the aliens broke formation, rushing toward the sound with weapons drawn. One took a shot at a movement that wasn't there and instantly revealed his position. Ghost struck fast and silent. A garrote fashioned from scavenged wire slipped around the alien's throat, yanking him backward into the mire. The swamp swallowed his struggles without a sound. The second alien spun around, seeing nothing but mist and shadows, firing wildly into the trees. Soap emerged behind him, a length of jagged steel in his hand, and drove it between the plates of the alien's armor. He eased the body to the ground as if putting a child to bed, his own breathing barely louder than the insects buzzing around them. By the time the others realized something was wrong, Ghost and Soap had already retreated into the woods. Fear spread like wildfire. Zarvek, bruised and bloodied, tried to rally his remaining soldiers, but every order he barked was met with flinches and darting eyes. Every gust of wind, every snapping branch, every ripple in the water was now a threat in their minds. Ghost and Soap knew the terrain better than any of them, but now they didn't even need the traps. The aliens were tearing themselves apart with their own terror. It wasn't just the traps or the swamp or the silent ambushes. It was the whispers. Ghost had rigged up an old satellite relay to hijack the aliens' comms, feeding a constant low murmur of human voices into their earpieces. It was a simple trick, but devastating. At first, the voices were just murmurs, indistinct. Then they began to take shape. Voices of fallen comrades pleading for help. Orders that contradicted Captain Zarvek's commands. Laughing taunts that seemed to come from inside their helmets. The kill squad didn't know what was real anymore. Reality itself had become a weapon turned against them. One alien broke completely, screaming and throwing down his weapon before sprinting into the swamp. The others didn't even try to stop him. They just tightened their circle and tried to pretend the world hadn't collapsed around them. Ghost and Soap let him run. The swamp would take him soon enough. As night fell, they pressed closer. They used the dark like a third weapon, moving without sound, setting fresh traps right under the aliens' noses. Ghost caught one alien by the ankle with a simple snare trap, yanking him off his feet and leaving him dangling upside down from a tree, his plasma rifle lost somewhere in the mud below. The others hesitated to cut him down, terrified it was bait for a bigger ambush. Soap prowled the perimeter, finding another alien too far from the others. With ruthless precision, he used a length of sharpened branch to disable the soldier's knee, then melted back into the fog as the alien howled in agony. Ghost listened to the cries and the confused shouts of the others, feeling the fear building to a breaking point. It was almost time. When the final assault came, it wasn't a glorious battle. It was a massacre of chaos and terror. Ghost threw a cluster of homemade smoke bombs into the camp, filling the area with choking, blinding fog. Lights from damaged equipment flickered through the mist, casting warped shadows that danced and twisted. Half blind, half mad, the kill squad fired in every direction. Plasma bolts tore into trees, into water, into each other. One alien stumbled into a pit trap Ghost had dug the night before, the sharpened stakes at the bottom making a sickening crunch as he fell. Another fled into the darkness only to be caught by a swinging log trap that slammed him into a tree with bone-breaking force. Zarvek tried to hold the line, but he was a leader with no army. When he turned to shout an order, he found only empty spaces and crumpled bodies. In the chaos, Soap rushed him head-on, moving like a force of nature. Zarvek fired wildly, but Soap ducked under the blasts, slammed his shoulder into the alien's chest, and drove him backward into the mud. Ghost was already there, securing the commander with a loop of wire and yanking him tight against a tree. They left him there, broken and weeping, the last survivor of a once proud squad. The mist began to lift with the first light of dawn, revealing the full devastation. The swamp, so indifferent before, now looked almost complicit in the carnage. Broken weapons floated in pools of black water. Bodies half submerged stared up at the sky with lifeless eyes. The proud kill squad had been reduced to nothing but wreckage and ghosts. Ghost and Soap stood together on a ridge, surveying the scene. They were caked head to toe in mud, their gear battered, their faces smeared with blood and filth, but there was a fierce, satisfied gleam in their eyes. Soap spit a mouthful of swamp water into the dirt, and shook his head. "And they thought they were hunting us." Ghost snorted quietly and adjusted the battered stock of his rifle. "Welcome to Earth," he muttered. They turned away from the ruined camp without looking back, melting into the mist as silently as they had come. The hunt was over, but the war had just begun, and somewhere high above, another squad was already preparing to descend. Ghost and Soap didn't care. They would be waiting, covered in mud, grinning like devils, ready to teach the next fools that Earth was not a place you conquered. It was a place that swallowed you whole. The swamp was silent except for the occasional drip of water from the twisted trees, each sound echoing like a gunshot in the heavy air. Ghost and Soap moved through the wreckage of the battlefield with the casual ease of hunters walking among their trophies. What was left of the kill squad clung desperately to the battered remains of their drop ship, building makeshift barricades out of fallen branches and broken equipment, trying to create some semblance of safety. It was laughable. No amount of tech or barricades could save them now. They were cornered, exhausted, and mentally shattered. Ghost crouched in the shadows, watching them for a long moment before glancing sideways at Soap. Without speaking, they understood the plan. This wasn't about taking them out quickly. It was about erasing their last shred of hope. Ghost moved first, crawling on his belly through the muck until he was within arm's reach of the barricade. He rigged a small explosive charge, a homemade device cobbled together from scavenged alien power cells, onto the base of one of their makeshift walls. Soap, meanwhile, circled around to the far side, setting up another trap involving a length of thorny vines strung low across a clearing. When Ghost gave a low, sharp whistle, the charge went off with a muted thump, sending mud and splinters flying. The aliens panicked, rushing to plug the gap, exactly as Ghost and Soap had predicted. The first alien to sprint across the clearing hit Soap's vine trap full speed. His legs went out from under him, and he crashed face first into the mud, his weapon skidding away into the swamp. He tried to scramble up, but before he could, Ghost was on him, a flash of steel cutting through the mist. The alien didn't scream. Ghost made sure of that. One by one, the defenders were picked off, not by overwhelming firepower but by patience and ruthless precision. It was not a battle anymore. It was an extermination. Zarvek, battered and bleeding from a dozen wounds, tried to rally his few remaining troops, pulling them back into a tight circle. Ghost and Soap let them cluster, let them think they were regaining control. It made the collapse all the sweeter. Using the last intact alien turret against them had been Soap's idea. It took him less than 10 minutes to hack the targeting system and redirect it with a looped feed showing nothing but empty swamp. When Zarvek barked an order for the turret to open fire, it did, on his own men. Ghost watched with grim satisfaction as plasma bolts ripped into the barricades, scattering the aliens like frightened animals. In the chaos, Soap used the confusion to set off a series of small fires around the camp. Nothing major, just enough smoke and heat to drive the survivors into the open, right into the waiting traps. Ghost caught one alien soldier trying to flee through a thicket, yanking him down into a hidden pit filled with sharpened sticks. Soap snagged another with a rope snare that hoisted him into the air, where he hung screaming until a sharp jerk of the rope ended it. The swamp itself seemed to close in tighter, as if the land had decided to join in the hunt. By late afternoon, only Zarvek and two others remained. They huddled together at the shattered dropship, weapons shaking in their hands, eyes wild with terror. Ghost and Soap didn't rush the final act. They moved slowly, methodically, letting the survivors see glimpses of them through the mist, mud-covered figures with blank, merciless eyes. Every time Zarvek thought he spotted one, he fired, wasting precious ammunition on shadows. Every missed shot deepened the despair. Soap found an old fallen tree near the camp and used it as cover to get close. From there, he launched a rock into the wreckage, making a loud, sharp clang that sent Zarvek's last two men running to investigate. Ghost waited for them in the fog. One he took down with a garrote of braided vines, the other with a sharpened stick through the armor seam at the neck. Silent. Brutal. Efficient. When Zarvek finally realized he was alone, his weapon fell from his hands. He staggered backward, sinking into the mud, whispering in his guttural alien tongue words that even without translation were clearly begging. Ghost approached slowly, stepping out of the mist like a phantom. He said nothing. He didn't need to. His presence was enough to shatter whatever remained of Zarvek's spirit. The alien dropped to his knees, sinking further into the mud, and raised his empty hands in surrender. Soap moved in from the other side, rifle casually slung over one shoulder, and kicked Zarvek's discarded plasma rifle deeper into the swamp with a lazy flick of his boot. For a moment, the three figures stood there in the heavy silence, the only sound the distant rumble of thunder over the horizon. Ghost leaned in close, his voice low and cold. "Earth isn't yours to hunt." Zarvek's eyes widened, the words cutting deeper than any blade. Soap gave a low chuckle and pulled out a small, battered recording device from his pocket. He thumbed it on, recording the broken, defeated face of the kill squad's leader. Without a word, they bound Zarvek's hands and dragged him to a spot in front of the wreckage. There, they forced him to kneel in the mud, framed by the ruins of his squad's failure. Ghost patched into the kill squad's mothership comms frequency using stolen equipment, a crude signal but strong enough to carry the message. He held up the recording device to the camera feed and broadcast the image back to the orbiting fleet. Zarvek, broken and weeping, kneeling in the filth of earth. Behind him, the swamp burned low and steady, smoke curling into the storm-heavy sky. Soap stepped into the frame just long enough to flash a mock salute, mud dripping from his fingers. They ended the transmission with a simple message scrawled into the mud in front of Zarvek. "Send more." The mothership did not respond. No evacuation, no reinforcements. Just silence, heavy and absolute. Ghost and Soap stood over the kneeling alien for a long moment before turning their backs and walking into the swamp. They didn't bother executing him. The swamp would do that job soon enough. No enemy survived long without backup out here. As they trudged through the mud, battered and bruised but alive, the first heavy drops of rain began to fall. Soap tilted his head back, letting the rain wash some of the grime from his face. Ghost just kept walking, his thoughts already on what would come next. Earth wasn't just their home. It was their weapon. Anyone foolish enough to bring the fight here would learn that lesson the hard way. And if the mothership was stupid enough to send another kill squad, well, Ghost and Soap would be ready. They'd be waiting in the mud, smiling like wolves with blood on their teeth, ready to turn another group of arrogant invaders into nothing more than a cautionary tale whispered among the stars. The rain hammered down with a force that blurred the lines between land and sky, turning the swamp into a churning sea of mud and broken trees. Ghost and Soap pressed on through the storm, their boots sucking free of the muck with every step, their gear soaked through but their spirits burning bright. Behind them, the remnants of the kill squad's camp were already disappearing beneath rising water and falling ash. It was as if the earth itself had decided to erase the evidence, swallowing up the trespassers without leaving a trace. Ghost tightened the straps on his battered pack and adjusted the rifle slung across his back, his gaze sharp even through the sheets of rain. Soap trudged beside him, his movements easy despite the exhaustion written across every line of his body. The two men barely spoke. There was no need. They moved with the effortless synchronization of soldiers who had survived more battles together than either could count. Their extraction point was still a few clicks west, near an old ranger station abandoned decades ago, and now reclaimed by the wild. As they moved, they left no trail, their muddy forms blending into the landscape as naturally as the trees themselves. Ghost kept his senses sharp, listening not just for enemies but for the subtle shifts in the swamp that might signal new dangers. Even with the kill squad shattered, complacency meant death out here. They were halfway to the extraction point when they heard it, the low, mechanical hum of engines cutting through the storm. Ghost and Soap froze, dropping into the muck without hesitation. They exchanged a glance, reading the same thought in each other's eyes. Reinforcements. Peering through a curtain of rain, Ghost spotted the shapes descending through the clouds. Another drop ship, larger than the last, its belly lined with heavy assault pods. Even at a distance, they could see the glint of new, sharper armor, the crackle of stronger weaponry. Whoever was in charge up there had decided not to take chances this time. They weren't sending another hunting party. They were sending an execution squad. Soap spat into the mud and shook his head with a grimace. Ghost gave a slight nod, acknowledging the change in stakes. They could slip away and live to fight another day. It would be easy to vanish into the swamp, let the reinforcements waste themselves chasing phantoms. But that wasn't who they were. Instead, they moved toward the landing zone, circling wide to stay downwind and out of sight. Ghost studied the newcomers through a cracked pair of binoculars he had scavenged earlier. These weren't just better armed, they moved like professionals. No wasted steps, no signs of panic or fear. It would take more than mud and homemade traps to break these ones. That suited Ghost and Soap just fine. They had no interest in fighting the same battle twice. This time, it would be a message. A warning carved into the very bones of the earth. By the time the new squad fanned out and began sweeping the area, Ghost and Soap were already in position. They watched from the shadows as the newcomers examined the remains of the first squad. Zarvek's broken body had been left as it was, half buried in mud, his armor scorched and pitted. The reaction from the new arrivals was immediate. They tightened their formation, scanning the trees with wary precision. Good. Fear was already seeded. Now it just needed to grow. Using the storm to their advantage, Ghost and Soap began their new assault with sound. Not attacks, not traps, but carefully orchestrated chaos. They rigged the old communication relay to emit false signals, mimicking distress calls from the dead. Ghost mimicked gunfire by snapping heavy branches in the distance, while Soap used reflective surfaces to flash phantom movements between the trees. They kept moving, never staying in one place long enough to be pinpointed. The execution squad responded with cautious advances, sweeping arcs of plasma fire that hit nothing but mist and rain. Patience was their deadliest weapon. They let hours stretch into exhaustion, let the weather and the fear gnaw at the new invaders. When one soldier strayed just a little too far from his squad, Ghost was there, dragging him silently into the mire, leaving only a floating rifle as a grim marker. When a second soldier slipped in the mud and fell behind, Soap made sure he never got up again. Always quiet. Always unseen. As darkness fell again, the swamp seemed to come alive, every ripple and gust of wind a potential threat. The execution squad tried to dig in, fortifying their position around the dropship, just like the first group had. It didn't save them then, and it wouldn't save them now. Ghost and Soap moved among them like wraiths, sabotaging equipment, cutting power lines, rerouting sensor feeds. By the time the squad realized they were being dismantled piece by piece, it was too late. Ghost slipped through the shattered perimeter and left a small calling card in the center of their camp, a simple, mud-smeared helmet from one of the fallen, balanced on a stake. Carved into the stake with a scavenged plasma knife were two words, "Still here." When the soldiers found it, panic finally cracked their discipline. They fired blindly into the swamp, lighting up the night with bolts of energy that illuminated nothing but fog and rain. That was the cue. Ghost and Soap unleashed the final stage. They triggered charges hidden in the trees, sending trunks crashing down, cutting off escape routes. They used stolen grenades to crater the ground around the camp, forcing the invaders into tighter, more vulnerable positions. And when the real attack came, it was not with guns but with the earth itself. Floodgates set into natural channels were breached, sending walls of water surging through the camp, sweeping equipment, weapons, and terrified soldiers into the darkness. By dawn, the execution squad was gone. Some dragged under by the floodwaters, others disappearing into the swamp never to be seen again. Ghost and Soap watched the sun rise from a high ridge, their forms barely visible through the lingering mist. They were covered head to toe in mud, their weapons battered, their bodies bruised and bloodied. But they were alive. And victorious. Soap let out a low whistle as he surveyed the wreckage below. "Think they'll get the message this time?" he asked, wiping a smear of blood from his cheek. Ghost didn't answer immediately. He stared out at the swamp, where the bodies of 2 squads now lay hidden beneath the mud and water, and where the mist still clung to the trees like a shroud. Finally, he gave a small, grim nod. "If they don't," he said, his voice a growl in the rising wind, "we'll still be here." They turned their backs on the ruins and disappeared into the wilderness once more, ghosts in the mud, guardians of a world that refused to be conquered. Above them, the sky rumbled, heavy with the promise of another storm. And somewhere beyond the clouds, more enemies might be gathering, arrogant enough to think Earth was just another world to tame. Let them come. Ghost and Soap would be waiting, patient as the Earth itself, ready to remind them that this planet did not forgive, did not forget, and never, ever surrendered.